And what we're going to be doing is we're going to look at how it is that arguments start and how they escalate. And then next week we're going to come back and have the second part where we're going to learn how to fight fair. So tonight we're going to be learning really how to avoid an argument and keep an argument from starting. So you have your notes there that I have ready for you, and if you'll notice the first point on here is that we're going to be looking at some personality defects. We're going to be looking at about 21 or 22 personality defects that make a person prone to problems. And so if we have these characteristics in our life, or if our husband or our children have these characteristics in their life, then this is going to be making them prone to problems. So the first characteristic we want to notice is that a touchy person is super sensitive. And let's turn over to Ecclesiastes 7, verses 20 through 22, where the ecclesiastic writer tells us not to be a touchy or a super sensitive person. In Ecclesiastes 7, verse 20, he says, "Indeed, there is not a righteous man on earth who continually does good and who never sins. Also, do not take seriously all the words which are spoken, lest you hear your servant cursing you. For you also have realized that you, likewise, have many times cursed others." So he says there's not a righteous person on earth who never sins, who continually does righteous and never sins. Notice that this word sins is not talking about walking in sin, but it means to miss, like to miss the mark, hence to sin. So every single person, there are times in their life when they say the wrong thing, they do the wrong thing, when they miss and they slip. So he simply says there's no one who is perfect, who never makes a mistake. Then he says, don't take seriously everything you hear. Take seriously or heed is used widely for the feelings, the will, and even the intellect and the heart. So don't take seriously. Don't let everything you hear affect your feelings, because what you're going to hear, if you're listening too hard, then you're going to hear your servants curse you. Notice that this word curse means to make or cause make light, trifling, make bright, bring into contempt, lightly esteem. So if you may hear your servants maybe saying some bad things about you, or maybe just laughing about something stupid you did and having a good time at your expense. So he says, don't be listening too hard and taking all these things to heart, because you know that you do the same thing. That you laugh at things that other people do that maybe was a little bit stupid or not quite that bright. And so just simply realize that everybody makes mistakes. And we all have areas of where we are super sensitive compared to other people because of maybe the way we were brought up or certain problems we've had in our life, that we have areas of being super sensitive. So we need to realize that a touchy person is someone who is super sensitive, and because they are super sensitive, then they are going to be prone to problems. And so I have down there, don't wear your problems on your sleeve, because that's something that is going to be leading to anger. Okay, then the next characteristic that we would call a personality defect is that a fool's vexation is known at once. And let's turn over to Proverbs 12, verse 16 to notice this characteristic. In Proverbs 12, verses 16, and here it says, "A fool's vexation is known at once, but a prudent man conceals honor." Now this is really kind of the opposites of what we've been talking about in an earlier class about Abigail and Nabal. We talked about a fool, and notice up here that the word fool means stupid, silly, and has the idea of being a wicked or a vile person or a perverse person. So someone who is wicked and who is silly, then he is someone, his vexation, and notice that vexation or wrath means to trouble, by implication to grieve, to rage, to be indignant, to be angry, to be grieved, to take indignation and provoke, to anger and to wrath, have sorrow or vex. So here it is, it says in Proverbs 12:16 that a fool, his vexation, his anger is known at once. You don't have to wonder what he's angry at. It's just right there, very open and very obvious. But then it says that a prudent person, and remember this was the word that was used to describe Abigail, that she was intelligent, that she had a perception of things, she understood what life was all about, then she conceals dishonor, the prudent person. Conceal means to plump, i.e. to fill up the hollows, by implication to cover, with clothing or secrecy, to clad self, clothes, concealed, cover. Then dishonor or shame means confusion, dishonor, reproach, shame, and it's from a word meaning to be light, causing to hold in contempt, base, contempt, despise, lightly esteem, set light, or seem vile. So the wise person knows how to conceal this dishonor. And a fool's vexation is known at once. You know, we don't have to go very far to notice a fool's vexation. All we have to do is go to the grocery store and watch the people in the checkout stand. Some of these people are very angry because the lines are long and maybe they've forgotten something, or perhaps the clerk has the wrong price on the computer, something like this. And yet there are other people in a long line that seem to be very relaxed, and they realize that getting angry is not going to make the line move faster. All it's going to do is raise their blood pressure. So all we have to do is to go to the checkout stand, and we can see which people are fools and which ones of them are prudent individuals. So really what a prudent individual does is they allow their anger to disappear because simply they realize that their anger is foolish. So here's an example of a fool whose vexation is known at once. Husband can't even read the paper without his wife coming in and chewing on him about just every little thing. Just every little thing is making her angry and irritable. But as we continue to look at characteristics that cause problems and create arguments, we want to continue. We want to notice that another characteristic that causes problems is jealousy. And let's turn over to Proverbs 27, verse 4, to notice something about jealousy. Proverbs 27, verse 4. And here it says, "Wrath is fierce, and anger is a flood. Who can stand before jealousy?" A little later, we're going to define anger and wrath. And what you're going to find is that wrath is the strong word for anger. And then when you see anger in the Proverbs, anger is usually comes from a different word, and it is a lighter form of anger. So he says wrath, hot, intense anger, it's fierce. And anger, just plain old ordinary anger, it's a flood. But who can stand before jealousy? Anger is bad enough, but when you get jealousy involved, who can stand before jealousy? Of course, if you've been reading the handouts that we've been passing out on wife abuse, you know that one common characteristic of these very severe problems is jealousy. The wife cannot do anything without her husband being suspicious of her activities, of accusing her of having affairs and calling her all kinds of ugly names. But you know there are more simple ways that we can be jealous. A wife can be jealous because guess what her husband gets to do? He gets to go to work every day. He gets to meet exciting people. He has exciting people to talk to, and he gets to do all of these things. But you know a husband can be jealous because you know what his wife gets to do? She gets to stay home and, in his view, watch soap operas and lay around and eat candy and do whatever she wants. So from their different perspectives, then it's easy for them to have a jealous attitude. A lot of times we see this among our children, that they are jealous because older sister or older brother gets to do this, or here's my little brother. You didn't let me do this when I was a kid, but here it is, you're letting my little brother do this or my little sister do this. So jealousy is really something that is very easy to have and can affect different areas of our life. So jealousy, who can stand before jealousy? Then in James 4, verse 2, and we're going to be going to James a lot tonight, we want to notice another characteristic here of jealousy. In James 4, verse 2, it says, "You lust and do not have, so you commit murder, and you are envious and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask." So you may be envious of what other Christians have, envious of their clothes, envious of their home, envious of their job, envious of just all sorts of things that they have. And so God says that when we're envious, that this is something that causes fights and quarrels. Another character defect is selfishness. Here in James, see, I've already turned away from there, so let me get back over in James. Okay, in James chapter 4, verses 2 through 3 that we just got through reading, let's read verse 3. He says, "You ask and do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your pleasures." So here it is, when you go to God for prayer, you're asking for things, but you're asking with the wrong motive. You're asking from selfishness, for what is in it for you, looking out for your own best interest instead of others. Okay, let's go back to Proverbs 23, verses 6 through 8, and notice another characteristic of selfishness. In Proverbs 23, verses 6 through 8. And here it says, "Do not eat the bread of a selfish man, or desire his delicacies. For as he thinks within himself, so he is. He says to you, eat and drink, but his heart is not with you. You will vomit up the morsel you have eaten, and waste your compliments." Now this is just another form of selfishness. And I don't know if you've ever been in someone's home that has done what this proverb says, but I have been. One time there was this lady that was this gourmet cook, invited my husband and myself over to supper. And we were really looking forward to this because she just really had a good reputation for being a good cook. And all during the time while we were sitting there at her table, she kept talking about how expensive food was and how much it had cost to prepare this meal. And she just kept going on and on and on, so that after a while we began to feel like that we really weren't welcome, that she was just feeding us because she felt obligated to, and that she really resented having to pay all the money that she had to pay. So selfishness is something that can show itself really in a lot of different ways. We've talked about in an earlier class how in Ephesians 5:33 that the husband is commanded to love his own wife as his own body, so that he is not selfish towards her. That as a leader, it's very easy to be selfish. And so this is a characteristic that causes problems and causes fights. Then as we continue to look at the character defects, and we want to notice that a guilty conscience makes one ripe for problems. We turn over to Genesis chapter 4, verses 3 through 7. This is the story of Cain and Abel, and this is where God just tells Cain that his guilty conscience is going to get him into trouble, going to lead to disaster. In chapter 4, verse 3, it says, "So it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. And Abel, on his part, also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering. But for Cain and for his offering he had no regard. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. Then the Lord said to Cain, 'Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it.'" So here it is. God recognized that Cain had a guilty conscience because he had not offered the right kind of sacrifice to God, and God was not pleased with him. God told Cain the way to solve that problem was to do right, to do what God wanted him to do, and then he would not have a guilty conscience. But if he didn't take care of his guilty conscience, then he was going to have problems, and sin was going to be crouching at the door. And of course, we know the stories that he found his brother, and then he killed his brother because he blamed his brother for really his sin and for what he had done. And all of this came from a guilty conscience. Then in Proverbs 28, verse 18, you'll notice another characteristic. Proverbs 28, verse 18. It says, "He who walks blamelessly will be delivered, but he who is crooked will fall all at once." So if we're keeping our conscience clear so that we are walking blamelessly before God, then we're going to be delivered. We're going to be delivered from a lot of problems. But he who is crooked, who's not walking the straight and narrow, then he will fall all at once. So when we have a guilty conscience, then there are all kinds of problems that are just waiting for us to make our life miserable. Then, another character defect is that of an evil person finds no good. In Proverbs 21, verse 10. In Proverbs 21, verse 10, it says, "The soul of the wicked desires evil. His neighbor finds no favor in his eyes." So if a person just has a wicked soul, then it doesn't really matter what his neighbor or what anybody else does. He's not going to be able to find any good in them. He's not going to be able to appreciate what they do. He's going to be ripe and ready for an argument, and it's not really going to matter what anyone else does. Then we see that drinking causes contentions and complaining. In Proverbs 23, verses 29 through 35, in Proverbs 23, verses 29, it says, "Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has contentions? Who has complainings? Who has wounds without cause? Who has redness of eyes? Those who linger long over wine, those who go to taste mixed wine. Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. At the last it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Your eyes will see strange things, and your mind will utter perverse things. And you will be like one who lies down in the middle of the sea, or like one who lies down on the top of a mast. They struck me, but I did not become ill. They beat me, but I did not know it. When shall I awake? I will seek another drink." So here it is, it's describing a drunkard, how that their mind sees strange things, that their mouth says ugly things, and that they can get into all kinds of fights and be beat up, and they don't know what anybody is doing to them. They've lost control of their life. But a person who is involved in drinking, then they are someone who is very ripe for all kinds of problems. Now, when we think about just all of these character defects, and that the evil person sees no good, and how it is that the drunkard is ready to complain to complain at others. Here's a little cartoon. You see this man has crashed into the side of Ziggy's house, and his car has landed in Ziggy's living room. The driver, who obviously has done something wrong here, tells Ziggy, "You better be insured." Now, this is the attitude a lot of times people have. It's not my fault, it's your fault, no matter what it is, no matter how obvious it is, that really it is their fault. Another character flaw is that of a crooked mind. A crooked mind finds no good in Proverbs 17, verse 20. And in Proverbs 17, verse 20, it says, "He who has a crooked mind finds no good, and he who is perverted in his language falls into evil." Notice what the word crooked up here means. Crooked or froward, I think the King James says, means distorted, hence false, crooked, froward, perverse. And perverse doesn't mean necessarily like a perverted person. It just means someone who has changed something from its natural way. So someone who has a crooked mind, they distort what they see. They look at things in a crooked way. And it says he finds no good. And this word good is the one that we have seen in an earlier class that has a long string of synonyms for that. It means good, used in the widest sense. So he doesn't see good in any way, shape, or form when he looks at other things, because he is perverse or perverted. Notice that perverted means to turn about or over, by implication to change, overturn, return, pervert. So he's perverted because he changes things from the natural way that they are. A pervert, a sexual pervert, is someone who uses sex in a way that it wasn't designed. He changes it from its natural function. So this perverse or person is not a sexual pervert. He is just someone who looks at life and he changes life. He turns it over. He doesn't look at it accurately. He doesn't see life like what it is. And I think this verse, one person that this verse is talking about is a perfectionist. Now, many times we don't know what a perfectionist is, because we'll look at people and we'll say, well, they don't do everything perfectly. Well, that's not what a perfectionist is. A perfectionist never does everything perfectly, because it's humanly impossible to do that. But he is someone who has an attitude toward things where he looks at things. The perfectionist, what he does, he looks at something and he doesn't focus on the 95% good in a thing. Instead, he looks at the 5% that is lacking, and he is unhappy. He is miserable because it is 5% bad, instead of saying, hey, this is good. I've reached the goal 95% of the way. But instead, this 5% that is bad makes him very irritable. So what does Proverbs 17:20 say about this person? It says, he who has a crooked mind finds no good. He can't see the good in anything. And he who is perverted in his language, who changes and twists and focuses in on the bad instead of the good, then he falls into evil. There is an expression that calls this type of person, they say that he has the red pencil mentality. It's like you go to school and your teacher gets out her red pencil, and when she looks over your paper, it is her job to mark everything you did wrong. Now, she doesn't mark the things you did right, but she marks the things you did wrong. And this is what the perfectionist is doing. He is marking everything that is wrong, and he has this red pencil personality and mentality. People who are perfectionists generally have very strong personalities, and it is very easy for them to pull someone else into that way of thinking. They get to picking things apart and looking at the things that are not right instead of the things that are good. They look at their wife and they begin to try to make her over, make her be 100% perfect, even though they are not 100% perfect. And so as the wife tries to become more and more like her husband, and of course men aren't the only ones who are perfectionists, so sometimes wives are perfectionists. But as she's trying to mold herself to become more like him, then she begins to lose her personality, and she ceases to be the charming person that he married in the first place, the person that he desired to balance him and to support him. And so there is danger in this personality, not only for the person who has this attitude of perfectionism, but there's danger also for the spouse to be caught up into it and to try to be like the perfectionist, when really that is not what the perfectionist needs. The perfectionist needs someone who can help him overlook this 5% that is bad. And he needs someone who can help him look at the 95% that is good. He needs someone to balance his personality so that he's not always in this red pencil mentality or red pencil mode. Okay, I have a cartoon up here of Hagar the Horrible. He's come home from work, and there's his wife. And he comes in the door, and she's got a line painted down the center of the room, over the bed and through the room, and he says, "Are you mad again?" Well, what gave him the clue, huh? So somehow she's communicating to him, yes, we do have a problem. Okay, another characteristic that is a personality defect that causes problems, that is a griping disposition. And we can turn to 1 Corinthians 10:10. Just notice the general principle about a griping disposition. How it is that a griping disposition is always ripe for problems. In 1 Corinthians 10, verse 10. And here it says, "Nor grumble." It's talking about the children of Israel. And let's begin up in verse 6 so we can kind of get the context here. It says, "Now these things happened as an examples for us, that we should not crave evil things as they also craved." Talking about the children, let's begin up in verse 5 here. It says, "Nevertheless, with most of them God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness." So he's talking about the children of Israel when they were marching around in the wilderness. And he says, "Now these things happened as examples for us, that we should not crave evil things as they also craved. And do not be idolaters as some of them were, as it was written, the people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play. Nor let us act immorally as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in one day. Nor let us try the Lord as some of them did, and were destroyed by the serpents. Nor grumble as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer." You know, when you go back and read the book of Numbers about how the children of Israel were wandering through the wilderness and all that God did for them, the main thing that you discover about them is that they were really experts at grumbling. Here it is, God had brought them out of the land of Egypt. He had miraculously allowed them to cross the Red Sea. He provided water for them. He provided manna for them. Their clothes didn't wear out, so that their shoes and their clothes were always suitable. They always had something warm to wear. And God provided everything that they needed. But these people were experts at grumbling. They were always griping and grumbling. And you know what they griped about? They said, "Back in Egypt, we had garlic. And we had cucumbers." Now, of course, they were having to make bricks and were having to work very hard, but they were forgetting that. But we just had this garlic that made food taste good, and we had cucumbers. And they griped and complained. And God got so angry and so worn out because no matter what He did for them, they continued to gripe and to complain. So that finally God said, "You are going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years until all of you gripers and complainers die." And the only ones that God allowed to go into the promised land were the ones who was their children who were not gripers and complainers. So griping and complaining is really a very horrible sin. It's a sin that makes other people angry and unhappy with us, and it is something that causes problems. Then let's turn over to Philippians 2, verses 2 through 14, to notice just a few characteristics here about griping. In Philippians, okay, I've got some, I don't have that right in your notes. Okay, I'm going to have to get that scripture for you later because I see I have the verses and not the chapter. So anyways, this is just another passage about griping. But really, when we think about griping, that griping is the chief cause of burnout. When you read articles about why teachers and doctors and lawyers and preachers and other people have burnout, the chief cause is because they get together, the teachers get together, and they gripe and complain about their jobs. And so griping creates burnout. Many times you will find in families that there are third and fourth generation gripers, because griping is something that is contagious and it is something that can be passed on. Yes, Sue?
I think that's 2:14.
Oh, okay, Philippians 2, verse 14. Okay. Let's turn over there and look at that right quick. Philippians 2, verse 14. And it says, do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world. So grumbling and griping, just murmur is actually what the word means there. Then this is something that is condemned. And when you think about families, it's very easy for families to get in the griping mode, to sit around the dinner table and to gripe about what so-and-so did and what somebody over here did, and to gripe about this at work and to gripe about this at school, so that people just get in the habit of griping. And griping is a habit that people develop. One time my husband was having dinner with an older couple, and he said that they were having some plumbing problems and they were expecting a plumber. And the plumber was supposed to come in about 30 minutes. And so this older couple began to gripe about plumbers. You know plumbers, they're always doing this, they're always charging you outrageously, they're always late. I know this guy is going to be late. And so they griped for 30 minutes until time for the plumber to come, and no plumber. So they griped for 30 more minutes about plumbers. I knew it. It's just like plumbers. You can't depend on them. They say they'll do something and you can't rely on a plumber. And so he sat there at the dinner table and he listened to this couple gripe for 1 hour about plumbers. And then there was a knock at the back door. And when they went to the back door, it was the plumber. And the plumber said, I've been out in your backyard for 30 minutes working and I can't find the shutoff valve. Would you please come out here and show me where the shutoff valve is? And so here it is, they had been griping for at least 30 minutes unnecessarily, but many times people just get into such a griping mode that it doesn't matter what happens, then they are ready to gripe and to complain about it, and this is something that causes many problems. Okay, another characteristic that we want to look at is that of a scoffer. Now, if someone is a scoffer, then it's going to promote contention, strife, and dishonor. Back to Proverbs verses 22 verse 10. And here it says, drive out the scoffer and contention will go out. Even strife and dishonor will cease. So when you've got a scoffer, then you've got contention, you've got strife, and you've got dishonor. Notice that basically a scoffer means properly to make mouths at, to scoff, hence from the effort to pronounce a foreign language, to interpret, so they're putting their own interpretation on things, have a derision, an ambassador, make a mock or mocker or scorn, being scornful. When they drive out contention, then contention just simply means a contest or a quarrel. You drive out the person who's interpreting things and having things in derision, then you get rid of a lot of contests and quarrels. Strife means to rule, by implication to judge, as empire, also to strive. So people who are scoffers many times are placing judgments on other people, placing judgments upon their actions. You drive out reproach or dishonor, and then it means the same as to lightly esteem or despise. So you drive out this attitude of holding someone in light esteem or despising them. I have down here that scoffing or sarcasm is maybe our modern word for this quality, that sarcasm is good for fighting publicly. You know, a lot of times we see husbands and wives have fights in public, and we don't even realize they are because they are so clever at hiding it with sarcasm. He'll make some little sarcastic remark at her, and he'll laugh, and everybody will laugh like it's a big joke. But she gets the message. She knows that he's really unhappy with her. So she'll make some cutting remark back to him and in a sarcastic way, and everybody will laugh, and everybody will think, boy, they're just having a good time. And the next thing you know, all the other couples in the group are pulled into this sarcastic mode of criticizing and ridiculing each other. So sarcasm is really a very clever tool for having a public fight and covering it up and getting everybody to laugh so that they really don't realize what is going on. But when you drive out the scoffer, then you're going to drive out contention, strife, and dishonor. Then another person who has a personality defect and has all kinds of problems is the man who hardens his heart. And let's turn over, it says he falls into calamity. Let's turn over to Proverbs 28, verse 14. Proverbs 28, verse 14. It says, how blessed is the man who fears always, but he who hardens his heart will fall into calamity. So it says that the man who fears always is doing what God wants him to do, then he's blessed. But the man who hardens his heart, then he's going to fall into calamity. Notice that this word hardens, and there's several different words for harden in Proverbs, but this particular one means it's first the subjective effort exerted by an overly heavy yoke. So it's the effort that is needed to do something that is hard to do, which is hard to bear, and secondarily, the rebellious resistance of oxen to the yoke. It's like rebellious oxen. So a person who is a hardened individual, I think the King James maybe calls him a stiff-necked individual. He is a stubborn individual. A person who is stubborn, then he is going to fall into calamity. A person who can't admit that he's wrong, who's determined to have his way no matter what. Notice that the word calamity or mischief, as the King James says, it comes from a root word which means properly to spoil, literally by breaking to pieces, figuratively to make or be good for nothing, bad, physically, socially, or morally, afflict, break down into pieces. And then it denotes physical injury or times of distress, but it mostly denotes unethical or immoral activity against other people, whether by speech or by practice. So this man who hardens his heart and he falls into calamity, some of the calamity that he falls into is just things that happen to him where he is broken, his life is broken into pieces, he's always has problems, but also he's the type of individual that we notice down here that's whether by his speech or by his practice, then he is mistreating other people. Part of his calamity, this simply is the natural result of mistreating other people and causes problems for him in that regard. Okay, then as we continue to look at the characteristics that cause problems, personality and character defects, we want to notice that depression makes bad days. In Proverbs 15, verse 15, here it says, all the days of the afflicted are bad, but a cheerful heart has a continual feast. So here it is, the afflicted means depressed in mind or circumstances. So here it is, a person is the afflicted, there's someone, they are depressed either in their attitude or things aren't going quite like what they want. And their days are bad or evil, as the King James says. Bad or evil just means adversity, affliction, bad, calamity. But on the other hand, the person with a cheerful or a merry heart, then that means they have a heart that is good, used in a wide sense, beautiful, best, better, bountiful, cheerful. So here it is, if a person just has a woe is me and life is so hard type of attitude, then everything that happens to them is going to be bad. They're going to be taking things the wrong way. Whatever happens to them, then they're going to see the negative part of it and they're not going to enjoy it. But the person who has the merry heart, then it says the cheerful heart, they have a continual feast. Now, all that they may have on their table is vegetables to eat. They may not be able to afford meat, but because of their attitude, it is like a feast. Everything that happens to them is a continual feast because they have this merry attitude. And when you think about having a merry attitude, a cheerful attitude, being able to see the humor in something is really one of the best tools that we have to get rid of aggravation and anger, because once we can laugh at something, then it loses its power over us. Now, I don't know how many of you grew up with little brothers, but I grew up with 4 little brothers. And I remember when I was in junior high and high school, my little brothers used to have the most disgusting habit. They would come to my door that I would have open, and they would dare to stick their big toe across the line into my room. And that just made me so angry that my brothers were violating my space, and I would get so mad at my brothers. And you know what my brothers would do then? They would turn right around and they would get me tickled. And I know they deserved for me to be mad at them because they had done this horrible thing and stuck their foot in my room. But once they got me tickled, I couldn't be mad anymore. And so they just got away with all kinds of things because they knew how to make me laugh and how to make me giggle, and I couldn't continue to be mad at them. So being able to laugh at things and having a merry heart gets rid of anger. Several years ago, my husband and I, before I tell about him, I'll tell about me. Several years ago, I had really been spring cleaning my kitchen. Of course, I've done this more than just once in my married life. But anyway, on this particular occasion, boy, I just really cleaned that kitchen great. I washed all the canisters, and you know how you get this icky guck back behind the counter and stuff. Well, I got every bit of that up, and when I just worked for hours, and when I got through, that kitchen just sparkled. It was perfect. There wasn't anything out of place. And I was so proud of that kitchen. And I walked out of the room and went back to another room for about 10 minutes, and I came back, and when I came back, guess what I saw? There was this old, ugly, empty buttermilk carton sitting there on the counter, messing up my beautiful, clean kitchen. And I started to get angry because the trash barrel is only 3 feet away. Why in the world didn't he throw it away? All he had to do was go 3 steps, and he could have thrown that milk carton away. And there it sat. Can't he see how hard I've been working in my kitchen and how it sparkles and how clean it is? And there's this old, empty buttermilk carton sitting there. And then I began to think, well, if the trash barrel is only 3 steps away for him, it's only 3 steps away for me, and I could throw it away just as easy as he could. And how silly to get upset over an old, ugly, empty buttermilk carton. And the more I began to think about how silly I was being for getting upset at a buttermilk carton, I got tickled. And I started to laugh. And my husband is in the living room, and he says, "What are you laughing about?" And I said, "Oh, you left the buttermilk carton sitting out on the kitchen counter." And he says, "Well, if that makes you happy, I'll do it some more." I said, "We can't make you happy." And do you know, to this day, he still leaves the empty buttermilk carton sitting out on the kitchen counter. But it doesn't make me angry anymore because I learned to laugh at it. That buttermilk carton lost its power over me once I learned to laugh at it. So if we can learn to laugh at things, then life is going to be a continual feast. But if we have the depressed attitude, then life is going to be bad, and it really doesn't matter what happens. Okay, another characteristic that causes problems is a lack of gratitude. In Philippians 4, verse 6, we want to notice the importance of gratitude. In Philippians 4, verse 6. Okay, here it says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God." So God wants us to not have a griping attitude like the Jews does, but He wants us to have an attitude of thankfulness. Being thankful that we've even got a husband to leave the buttermilk carton sitting out on the counter. Being thankful that we even have clothes to wear and food to eat and the simple things of life. And then we can let our requests be made known. Many times in Dear Abby and Ann Landers, you'll read about widows who write in and say, "I'm tired of these women griping about such and such that their husband did. I'd give anything to have a husband to do this or to do that irritates these other women," because they realize that this is something to be thankful for and that they're thinking about things in an improper way. Then in verses 11 and 12 it says, he says, "Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need." So here Paul is using himself as an example, that he's learned how to be grateful. If he's got a lot, he's grateful for that. But if he just has the bare necessities, then he's grateful for that. He's learned how to be content. But if we have an attitude of where we have a lack of gratitude, then we're going to have unhappiness, and we're not going to be happy with the things that we have. Okay, I have up here a cartoon about Charlie Brown and Lucy. Charlie Brown is coming to Lucy to visit her psychology counter, I guess is what it is. And here it is. Lucy tells him, she says, "I figured it out, Charlie Brown. If you stay depressed for 2 more days, you'll make it into the book of world records." Charlie Brown says, "Wow, that's great." Lucy says, "You just blew it." So he had needed to go 2 more days, and he blew it. Okay, here's another cartoon. This is Mama. Here it is. Her sons come home, and she's chewing them out. She goes, "Oh, you boys neglect me, and you are thoughtless of me. Fail to respect my wishes and ignore my advice. But do I ever complain?" And they say, "Never, Mama." She says, "You'd better believe it." So here it is. Mama, she does know how to complain, but she knows how to do it in such a way that she's fooling herself. "No, I don't complain." Then as we continue to look at characteristics that cause problems, another one is the characteristic of pride, that pride brings strife. In Proverbs 13, verse 10, Notice the characteristic about pride in verse 10. It says, through presumption, and if you have a King James translation, it says pride. Through pride comes nothing but strife, but with those who receive counsel is wisdom. So pride up here means arrogance, presumptuously, pride, proud. Of course, this pride is something that those of us who are parents, this is something we see in our children. That it doesn't take very long till they start to think that they are smarter than mother and dad. And it really doesn't make very much difference about what mother and dad think. If they have a different opinion, they've got more confidence in themselves. I remember when Wesley was in the first grade, he came home from school one day and he says, Mother, guess what? He said, I learned how to count to 113 today. Now I'm smarter than Daddy. So he had it all figured out because he could do that. He had all the answers and he was smarter than Daddy. So this is a characteristic that we see in teenagers. We see it in little first graders. But it's a characteristic that ideally our children are going to outgrow, because if it is a characteristic they have as an adult, then it is going to cause all kinds of problems. It's going to bring strife. If a husband or if a wife cannot admit that they're wrong, if they're going to defend their whatever it is they've said or they've done because they don't want to say they're wrong, then there is going to be all kinds of strife and problems in that marriage. So pride is a character defect that causes strife. Then, listening to gossip makes a person sensitive. In Proverbs 18, verse 8, Proverbs 18, verse 8, we want to notice the general characteristic about gossip. And here it says, the words of a whisperer are like dainty morsels, and they go down into the innermost parts of the body. So here it is, if we're listening to a gossip and if we're paying attention to what they say, we may think it's not having any effect upon us, but it is, because it's going down into the innermost parts of our body, and it may be having some effects upon us that we don't really realize that it is. And then let's turn over to Proverbs 26, verse 20. And here it says, for lack of wood, the fire goes out, and where there is no whisperer, contention quiets down. So when you don't have a gossip around, then you don't have nearly as much contention and nearly as many problems in a marriage as you would ordinarily. You know, when you think about the effect that gossip has upon people, a lady told me one time that when she had married her husband, and said she had not met neither one of his grandmothers. And so when they had been married at about 7 months, that her husband and her husband's mother, which would be her mother-in-law, took a trip and traveled for a couple of days to visit the grandmothers. And the whole 2 days that this daughter-in-law and her husband and her mother-in-law were in the car, the mother-in-law began to tell the new daughter-in-law all the family secrets. She told her about how wonderful her mother was, that her mother was loving and kind and what a great family it was, and told them all the family history and how wonderful her mother was. And then when she got to her husband's mother, which would have been the girl's husband's father's mother, his paternal grandmother, she began to tell him about all this grandmother's problems, about how cold and unloving she was, and all of the ugly things that she had done over the years. And so this young bride, had not met either one of these grandmothers. So for 2 days she listened, how good the one was, how bad the other one was. Then she met the grandmothers, and sure enough, it seemed that the mother-in-law's mother was very nice and warm, and that was right. And then when she met the father-in-law's mother, yeah, she seemed cold and indifferent, and she seemed to think, well, yeah, this was true. So over the next few years, this young bride did not have a chance to visit these people again because they lived a ways off, but she would send Mother's Day cards and write letters to the mother-in-law's mother, but not to the father-in-law's mother, because after all, she was cold and unloving and was kind of, their family just didn't know how to express affection. So this went on for several years until the bride, the daughter-in-law, one day realized, this lady has never done anything to me. I really don't know that any of these things are true, and it's really not right for me to treat this grandmother this way simply on the basis of what the mother-in-law said. So she began to send Mother's Day cards and write letters to the other grandmother also. Several years later, they made another trip back to visit the grandmothers. And this time they had a young child with them, had a great-grandchild with them to see the grandparents. So whenever they took the great-grandchild to see the father-in-law's mother, The father-in-law's mother let the little great-grandchild play and bang on her piano. And it wasn't playing, it was banging on the piano. And when they left, the mother-in-law said, "Boy, can you imagine that? She never let any of my kids bang on her piano. That piano is really sacred to her and really important to her. I can't believe she allowed that little great-grandchild to bang on the piano that way." And it was all because this woman believed, because she had treated the other grandmother fairly and equally. If we hear gossip about someone before we ever meet them or ever know them, then we're going to be affected by the way we react to them, the things they do. We're going to view it in light of that gossip, and it is going to cause problems. So listening to gossip is one that makes a person sensitive. It makes them overreact.